The Outlander Season 7 finale just aired, so let's talk about it. As always, this will have spoilers for the show and the books, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So episode 16 of Season 7 of Outlander is titled 100,000 Angels, and we open the episode with this scene of Jane and Fanny running through an open field, chasing dragonflies, laughing with one another, and hugging their mother, who is purposefully kept blurry. And it's a memory that Jane is recalling as she speaks with a man about the report of her arrest and what he plans to publish in the broadsheets. And this whole scene felt very CGI to me, with the bright colors and the fake dragonflies, but it's meant to evoke a callback and bring up the significance of dragonflies, and also the second book and season of the series, which is titled A Dragonfly in Amber. So in Celtic mythology, dragonflies are actually symbolic of transformation, of self-realization, of the understanding of life's deeper meaning, the ability to adapt and to change. And so it's a very applicable use of this metaphor and mythology in the story. And in the book, A Dragonfly in Amber, the dragonfly was meant as a metaphor for something beautiful and preserved in the amber in its proper time. And that's a symbol of the kind of unique love that Claire and Jamie have, given that she is a time-traveling nurse that finds herself with a Scottish Highlander. When we do cut to Jane sitting across this man with a horrible wig, she is very clearly not going to express any remorse over what she's done. She doesn't regret saving her sister. And this man reminds her, though, that her sister will read her words that are published in the broadsheet, even though she doesn't want him to be able to characterize her in a certain way. If she doesn't use her own voice, then Jane is going to be reading his words and not her own. And it's clear that she later on makes an amendment to her statement here, but the only reason she even thinks to do that is out of her love and respect for Fanny. Now in the books, this entire scene happens off screen, and I say that with air quotes because we only get this conversation and the information about her confession later on in a conversation between William and Lord John. And while we do get that conversation between Lord John and William in the show, I like that this one scene here is able to clarify that the only reason that Jane amended that she didn't stab him 26 times and said that it was once is because she knew that Fanny would eventually hear or read this information, and out of her love for her sister, she wanted to make sure that that was changed in the broadsheets. In the books, this entire event also takes place in Savannah, Georgia, and there isn't so much time between Jane being accused and suspected to when she is going to be put up to be hung. So the show is both expanding the timeline for this part of the story and condensing Claire's recovery. When we get to the title card again, we get the title of the episode, 100,000 Angels, and we see the Aurora Borealis, which is also known as the Dancing Ladies or the Northern Lights. And the Northern Lights are significant for Jane and Fanny as well, which we will find out later in the episode, like the title card often does imply. And then we cut to this scene here with Jamie and Claire, where the last episode ended with a sort of cliffhanger about Claire and her health after being shot in the previous episode. And here we see Jamie speaking to her over her bedside about how much blood is in the body and wishing that he could give her some of his own. This is a really beautifully acted scene between the two of them, but mostly Sam Heughan here as Jamie. And I loved the line about their blood flowing into one another, even though Claire in the books has explained to him that in this point in time, doing something like a blood transfusion isn't possible. And this dialogue is taken directly out of the books. But of course, I also think it's a great way for them to drop another line in about the blood of my blood, given the prequel series coming out this summer. I know that a lot of people were nervous given the promo video for this episode that we wouldn't have a lot of Jamie and Claire time, and I think we got the perfect amount with the two of them, and I think that these more tender moments between the two of them were some of my favorites from this episode because we finally get to see Jamie caring for Claire in ways that Claire often ends up caring for Jamie, and I really felt like Sam nailed the emotion in this scene. There's been some scenes in the past where I don't know if he's pushed it as much as he did in this scene, and it was very palpable here. If you want to read this chapter in the book, Written in My Own Heart's Blood, it's chapter 85. There's a few differences, obviously. The location's different. They're in a woman named Mrs. McCann's home in the book. Jamie acknowledges or points out to himself that Claire's hair is multicolored, and he also remembers Claire talking about the mismatch of the blood and how that might have affected young Ian and his Mohawk wife's ability to have children. So it's a very interesting passage, and he also prays in that chapter that it not be now, that Claire not leave him now, and he contemplates waking her up to give her more water, and her fever has just begun at this point. When Claire tells Jamie she's decided not to die, that's pulled from chapter 87, and she says that she doesn't want Jamie to have to experience what she felt. And in the books, Jamie says that he wouldn't have been able to take his own life because he has too many people that depend on him, and he wouldn't want to commit that type of a sin, but to lose her would be his own form of purgatory. I thought this was a really beautiful opening scene for the two of them, and I also liked the addition of seeing Rachel and Denzel Hunter watching them from afar, and obviously Denzel is the one who did the operation, so for him to see Claire talking and speaking with Jamie is probably very emotional for him, and we see a little hint of a smile on his face as well. We see William find Lord John at the British camp and asks him for help in an urgent matter, and John is willing to help him with anything, but you can see his face shift during this conversation when he starts to realize the severity of the situation, and his questions are strategic. He's definitely leading William to admit what he probably suspects is the case with Jane, and he's assuming that the situation is going to be something that probably wouldn't be in William's best interest to get involved in directly. So he gently kind of leads him into giving him the answer to his questions. Now in the books, this scene takes place at a dinner party at a man named Archibald Campbell's home. And William goes directly to the house because Fanny tells him that he is involved in her sentencing. And when he gets there, he can hear his Uncle Hal's voice, and he asks to speak with Hal, hoping that maybe Hal would be able to talk to Campbell and help him speak to Jane's character and potentially free her. And at that point, he discovers that Lord John is there too, and Lord John pulls William aside to get the story from him and see if he can help him in any way at that point. When William brings up Jane's trial to Campbell directly, Campbell is the one in the books that relays that she had stabbed him 26 times and assaulted him, and there's really no coming back from that. And it's clear in the conversation that Lord John really has his hands tied here, and they do a good job conveying that in this scene in the show too. In the books, he tells William to wait for him at a pub, and he will do his best to see that they can have a good word put in about Jane and try and help him in some way, but it is kind of implied that his hands are tied greatly here. We see young Ian return and tell Jamie that him and Lord John were able to save William and that he is safe, and he also brings up to Jamie that he's not going to rejoin the army. Now, I know a lot of people in my comments were saying, how could there be no repercussions for him? He left his men there. And yes, that was frowned upon, but in the books, he actually has many of the men come to visit him and Claire to check in on her and wish her well. He also gets a letter from Washington himself sending his wishes and personal notes of sympathy. So it is a little bit better received than I think the show might have been trying to tee up in the promotional trailer. We get to see Rachel and Ian reunite, of course, and Rollo, and at that point Rachel tells young Ian that Claire has been injured and had to have surgery and is recovering inside. I think a lot of people are confused as to why Rollo wouldn't have been with Ian. He's older at this point, as we know later on in the episode, so it was more common that Rollo wouldn't be accompanying him at this point. When William and John do reunite again, their conversation is very much following the book dialogue, and John is explaining to William that Jane has already confessed and there's really not so much he can do for him at this point, or for her. Now in the show, when John asks William, do you love her? He has this line that's not in the books where he says there is something about her. And I think it was added to help us kind of make sense of the ending of the episode where we get this big reveal about Jane's mother. But at this point in the story, in William's head, he realizes that there's no way to save Jane except for a physical assault, and he knows that he couldn't ask his uncle or Hal to do that for him, and they would never let him commit something so dangerous for someone like Jane. So come back for part 2 where I break down the second half of this conversation.